Ja Morant has the Memphis Grizzlies streaking once more, and the swagger is back. Dare I say, the vibes are immaculate? Not quite yet. Can't get ahead of ourselves, but Memphis has won 4 in a row, and Ja Morant is a major reason why. Plus, Luke Kennard and Brandon Clarke deserve your respect, and they will get our attention on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, dear listener, dear viewer, everybody out there in internet land. It is I, Joe Mullinax, your host for this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. No DeMichael Cole, busy covering the team that we enjoy as the Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. He will be back with us on tomorrow's show. Very excited to have DeMichael with us. I'm very excited to see DeMichael in person for the first time. We're going to talk about our post-game meetup on Friday night at Blue City Cafe there on Beale Street in Memphis, Tennessee. Lots of fun details coming about. We're going to record some weekend shows. I can't wait for my weekend in Memphis. But before we get there, we have to get through a couple episodes here on Locked On Grizzlies. And there's nowhere I'd rather be than with you talking Grizzlies basketball for the next 30 minutes. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Make sure you're checking us out wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Make DeMichael and myself here at Locked On Grizzlies part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption each and every time that an episode drops. Also, make sure that you're subscribing to our free daily newsletter, lockedondaily.com. Again, that is lockedondaily.com. I write for that newsletter for us here at Locked On Grizzlies, so it's Grizzlies words from me. I've been writing about the Memphis Grizzlies for over a decade now, and I'm so thankful to David Locke and everybody at Locked On for starting these newsletters and allowing me a chance to have a daily outlet like I once had back in the Grizzly Bear Blues days. So if you like my writing, if you aren't familiar with my writing and you want to check me out in a different way, lockedondaily.com, free daily newsletter. Again, in your inbox, words from me on the Grizzlies every single day. I am excited. I don't know if you can tell. I have a little bit more pep in my step. And as I've told you before, it's just different. It hits different. The air is more crisp. You feel a little more alive when the team that you follow, the team that you're a fan of, the team that you're passionate about, the team that you watch or listen to podcasts about on a daily basis. Thanks for being an everydayer. That team winning can do something to your mojo. And that is exactly what is transpiring with the Grizzlies right now. 4 straight wins after a 4-game losing streak. It's almost like it didn't happen, right? Can we just pretend that 4-game skid was never an actual thing? No, we have to actually accept that. You can't go back and get a do-over. Fair enough. I am impressed with how this team has responded, especially with Jaren Jackson Jr. out. The wheels could have come off this thing pretty easily, right? And now the momentum has shifted. The tables have turned to an extent. And the Grizzlies, who were tumbling, rumbling, bumbling, stumbling, we were doing episodes about Memphis falling to the 5 seed. As of this recording, they are thickly in the mix for number 2, right? And that is a good thing because as Golden State continues their rise up the standings, Minnesota looks pretty good. You don't want to lose too many games consecutively. You lose 1 here, 2 there. Losing skids are where you really start to see your standing in the Western Conference, in particular at the top, outside of the Thunder. That's where you start to see things go downhill. So it was good to see them respond to that, especially with their best player so far this season out. And with their best player so far this season out, their best player over the last 6 years has stepped up, give or take a year or two, given a variety of absences. And that, of course, is Ja Morant. Ja posted 28 points, 7 assists on the night against the Utah Jazz. Really explosive game for him, an efficient scoring game, 28 points on 17 shots, only 2 turnovers to the 7 assists. There's not a ton to complain about with Ja Morant's game in this one. I've been told that I'm too critical of Ja at times. Not much to say. I wish he could have made a couple of free throws after a foul on a missed dunk that he had, but that's nitpicking, right? Ja, I think, is something audacious. Like he's 32 of 36 on his last 36 free throw attempts. So Morant has been exactly what the Grizzlies need during this stretch of games without Jaren Jackson Jr. And even when Jaren returns, Ja is being exactly what the Grizzlies need him to be. And that is the spirit animal. That is the swagger. That is the one who dictates the energy. It has to come from Ja, and here's why. When you look at what Ja Morant is capable of physically, with the basketball in his hands, levitating through the air, it seems like he floats. There are very few, if any, NBA basketball players that are more must-see than Ja Morant when he is in the right headspace and when his body is feeling good enough for him to get to that place. He's at that place right now. And when that guy is doing the things that he is doing, the Memphis Grizzlies can beat anybody. To a lesser extent, it's like Zion Williamson in New Orleans, right? Ironically, Zion number 1 and Ja number 2 in the 2019 NBA draft. Ja has done more in the NBA than Zion has, so I don't want to make it seem like I'm comparing things directly. But when Zion plays the way he's capable of, he posted a triple-double the other night in a really impressive outing of his own. When the Pelicans play like that with Zion Williamson, they can beat a team like the Clippers, who maybe they're not supposed to beat. The Grizzlies can knock off anybody in the NBA, including the Oklahoma City Thunder or the Cleveland Cavaliers, who they see tomorrow. I'll see them in person tomorrow. Or the Boston Celtics. The Grizzlies can beat anybody on any given night when they have Ja Morant playing this way, because the NBA is that kind of league. You are dependent on your stars being stars. And it's a trickle-down effect, because when G.G. Jackson or Luke Kennard, who we'll talk more about later in the show, or even somebody who's a little bit more adjacent to what Morant is capable of in Desmond Bane, when they see Ja being Ja, they have a greater confidence about them. It's contagious, this confidence, this swagger. And if you think back to the good old days of this era of Grizzlies basketball, when they were doing post-game interviews that would make the Oklahoma City Thunder jealous, everybody's like, oh, look at how amazing the chemistry is of the Oklahoma City Thunder. The Grizzlies did it first, right? When you go back to those times when ESPN had a Memphis Grizzlies day and everyone was ready to appoint Ja the future of the NBA, those vibes were immaculate, right? Those were remarkable times, and then everything came crashing down for a variety of reasons. But we're on the way back up here, the Memphis Grizzlies are. And I think that Ja is finding that confidence again. He is looking within and rediscovering exactly who he is. And he is one of the best closers in the entire NBA. When that guy gets the ball in his hands with 2 minutes or less on the clock, I expect it to go in. I expect that shot to go in every time, and it won't go in every time. And that doesn't make Morant a failure when they miss a game winner, just like Kevin Durant wasn't a failure when he missed a game winner earlier on this week against the Grizzlies. When you're in the arena like that, you put yourself out there and you compete to the best of your ability. But Ja Morant is one of the very best that the league has at being able to rise to those moments and meeting those moments. He is a closer, and that is exactly what he's done these last 4 games. When Memphis has needed him most, he was there. And that breeds confidence. And that leads to guys thinking that they can do things that maybe they wouldn't have thought they could do as a team because they've got a guy like Ja Morant. So there were obviously other reasons that the Grizzlies won, right? I don't want to take away from any of those guys. We're going to talk about a couple of them here later on as we go through the show. And I also don't want to make it sound like it was a perfect win. The Grizzlies got out-rebounded terribly. Taylor Jenkins once again decided to go with a rotation with Jaren Jackson Jr. out that didn't include a lineup, that didn't include Desmond Bane and Ja Morant. Guess what happened? An 8-0 run almost immediately, right, for the Jazz. So there are things that can still be criticized. This game was closer than it should have been. Memphis was a double-digit favorite. The Jazz covered the spread. However you want to perceive that, could have been a better win. But a win is a win in the Western Conference when you're worried about seeding and you want to be someone hosting that first-round series and hopefully 2 first-round series as opposed to just 1. The Grizzlies found a way to get it done, despite the rebounding disparity, despite the fact that the Jazz were a more efficient scoring team in the game. The Grizzlies made more threes, and the Grizzlies had Ja Morant, and that really was the major outcome of the contest. Speaking of more made threes, the gentleman that was most responsible for that is going to be the focus of our next part of the show. We're going to talk about Luke Kennard and how this idea that Cam Spencer should replace him now, sorry, YouTube commenters, was always kind of crazy. Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by TurboTax. This is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now, Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who could do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives you your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, that you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is Taxes. Get an expert now at TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is also brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. I know I'm guilty of that. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. It's not just a budgeting app, Monarch Money. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. And it allows for easy collaboration with your partner. It's smoother than ever before to manage your money. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's a heck of a deal. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. So Luke Kennard goes in fuego, right? Nuke Kennard is a way that sometimes he is referenced. 7 made threes. 30 points for Luke Kennard, 11 of 14 from the fields. That's 30 points on 14 shots. Only took one free throw. He was taking a lot of shots outside the paint, of course. Luke also had 4 rebounds. Luke also had a steal and a block. Luke was a plus 19 on the contest. He had the best plus minus of anybody that played in the game, and it wasn't particularly close. The next closest Grizzly was Desmond Bane at plus 10. So Luke Kennard not only was in fuego shooting the basketball, not only was he contributing to winning, he was reminding us all in the wake of the Cam Spencer game, which Cam Spencer deserves credit for, right? He played really well against Phoenix. There's levels to this, right? There's levels to this. And Luke Kennard displayed why Cam Spencer, if he is the Luke Kennard replacement, which I haven't had a chance to talk too much about this yet, if he is the eventual Luke Kennard replacement, which makes logical sense when you're building your roster, you could probably pay Cam Spencer over the next 3 years what Luke Kennard will make in the first year of his next contract, $9 or $10 million. When you're comparing those two options and you're looking at trying to keep Bane, Morant, and Jackson Jr. together as long as possible, tough decisions have to be made. And this comes from a Luke Kennard guy, right? I'm a Luke Kennard stan, you could say. I, all the time, say that Luke Kennard is one of the top 10 three-point shooters in the history of the NBA, in the history of the National Basketball Association. So I would be fine if they tried to keep Luke Kennard as well. But tough decisions have to come about because of that. The guy we're going to talk about later on in the show, Brandon Clarke, are you moving on from him to keep around Luke Kennard? I wouldn't, because Brandon Clarke does a lot of things that Luke cannot do that Memphis needs still as they try to build a championship contending team. Luke is elite as a three-point shooter, and he has shown the capacity to be able to create offense, not just for himself, but for others this season. Same kind of stuff that he did, especially with the Detroit Pistons back in the day. He's been given the chance to be that guy again in Memphis, and he is paying dividends for the Grizzly in that space. He's having one of the best seasons of his career this year. Cam Spencer has done it once, twice in a game. That is an actual NBA game and not in South Haven or some other G League gym. Luke Kennard's doing it night in, night out, just about on the NBA level. And that presence of a veteran contributor is what the Grizzlies need to rely on going into this home stretch of the regular season and into the playoffs. Luke Kennard has been in the playoffs. Luke Kennard has been a key Grizzlies X factor going into a playoff series. There were times a couple of years ago, if you remember correctly, that the Grizzlies and the Lakers were playing in the playoffs. And Luke Kennard's injury designation was essentially the death knell for Memphis in that series. That's how significant I hate this phrase, his gravity is as a shooter. That's how much it matters for Luke Kennard to be able to make decisions with the ball in his hands as a secondary or tertiary creator of offense. In this motion offense that the Grizzlies are running, Kennard gets it, man. He understands the pump fake, the dribble penetration, finding shooters on the perimeter opposite, making the skip pass, looking for the guy in the corner. And it's not just those guys, it's also the secondary cutter, the guy cutting opposite or slashing to the basket from the opposite end of the court where Kennard made his penetration move. That matters. And that only comes from a guy who has played in the NBA for several seasons, which Cam Spencer has not done. The Grizzlies already have a ton of rookie influence, right? Jalen Wells. Jalen Wells has struggled of late, but Jalen Wells didn't shoot particularly well once again in this game. But his defense was valuable. He was able to defend without fouling in his 24 minutes of play. Zach Edey didn't play very much at all, only 20 minutes. We talked about that on yesterday's show. 4 rebounds for Edey in 20 minutes. This is a 7'4", 290-pound guy. Got completely outplayed by Walker Kessler and the other Utah Jazz bigs. That's a concern. Something to worry about moving forward. No denying that. Why would you add additional youth to the puzzle when you're going to have to play Wells and you're going to have to play Edey? You've got Luke Kennard. You have his capabilities. You know exactly what he can do with the ball in his hands, especially as a shooter, but even as that creator of shots for himself and for others. So this isn't about the long term right now. We're not data collecting. We're not trying to see, I wonder how Cam Spencer plays alongside Scottie Pippen Jr. We can figure that out in Summer League. We can figure that out if it's not Summer League in preseason. We can figure that out before opening night in practice and training camp. Luke Kennard may not be a part of those processes moving forward, but you know what he's a part of right now? The Memphis Grizzlies playoff push. And he provides items and things at a higher level than Cam Spencer, or to be honest with you, most other Grizzlies players that aren't among the big three. Would I start Luke Kennard instead of Jalen Wells? No, because I think that's short-sighted in terms of acknowledging what Wells brings defensively. Shooting slumps happen, especially for rookies. Wells will bounce back. Would I start Kennard instead of Bane or Morant? Obviously not. So I think Luke remains in his reserve role, but that role is locked going into the postseason. I wrote for Grizzlied this week about a perfect Grizzlies rotation. I do something like this just about every year that I'm writing. And I wrote about how Luke Kennard had to be a part of that conversation. He had to be in a 9-man postseason rotation because of what he brings to the table as a scorer, what he brings to the table as a weapon that opposing teams have to respect. The guy that we're going to talk about to close the show, Brandon Clarke, he impacts the game in a different way. You need the yin to the yang. You need somebody to balance the defensive versatility of a Clarke or a Vince Williams Jr. You need offensive weaponry. And Luke Kennard and Santi Aldama, who I also wrote about in the piece, would be those guys for me in terms of a perfect Memphis Grizzlies playoff rotation, guys coming off the bench. I don't know that G.G. Jackson makes that cut. I don't know that Scottie Pippen Jr. makes that cut. You know who I know makes that cut right now? Luke Kennard, because he's earned it. Because he's had the season that he's had, and he's earned the chance to be out there when the lights are brightest, when he's playing for his next contract, whether it's in Memphis or somewhere else. And he is reminding everybody just what he's capable of. He's not a one-trick pony. But even if he was a guy that only could shoot threes, holy crap, is he really good at it. He is one of the very best in the entire National Basketball Association at creating space. And if you run an offense where space is prioritized and forcing defenses to respect your capacity to convert threes matters, it makes a lot of sense to have Luke Kennard on your team. And I'm glad he is on the Memphis Grizzlies because he gives them exactly what they need. And especially in the playoffs where it's in shorter bursts, should Luke Kennard play 30 minutes in the playoffs? Probably not. Right? Probably not. Can he be an offensive spark and allow for Ja and Dez and Jaren to operate a little bit more freely? 100%. And that's exactly what he's going to be able to provide, and that's exactly what the Grizzlies will need. We'll close out this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, deeming it Brandon Clarke Appreciation Day here on the podcast. He is just phenomenal what he's doing right now, and we'll talk more about exactly that coming up. Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness has arrived, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who is going to be cutting down the nets at the end of it all. I have my eye on a few underdogs this year, and FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. The app is super simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. There's no waiting around. You're able to stay in the action with games happening almost every part of the day, starting at like 11 in the morning. There is always something to bet on. Go right now. Visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Somebody who was really impressive in college at Gonzaga and has continued that impressive nature, maybe not at the same level as he was in college, Brandon Clarke. We've talked a lot about Brandon Clarke here on Locked On Grizzlies. DeMichael made fun of me for my lack of understanding about modern medicine, apparently. The Achilles injury scared me, and I wrote about it in the newsletter for today. Go to LockedOnDaily.com, click on Locked On Grizzlies. You'll see the words there. Hopefully you'll subscribe and you'll get them in your inbox every day. But for today's newsletter, I wrote about Clarke and how the Achilles tear for him was especially nerve-wracking because of what makes him great, the leapability and then the ability to re-leap, to get back up off the ground, to play bigger than his size. He's 6'8", and he plays center. He's a guy who's depended so much more on his jumping capacity, his lateral movement defensively in terms of being a switching defender, how he was able to, when the Minnesota Timberwolves a few years ago, were able to make Steven Adams not irrelevant, but able to get him off the court in a way that Zach Edey would probably get attacked even worse in a postseason series, depending on the matchup now. Brandon Clarke made that okay. He was able to take on those switches. He was able to make opponents have to find another counterpoint that maybe was not as effective. Clarke was able to be that guy defensively. And because of his leaping, because of his picking or screening and his pick and roll actions, the ability to be in the dunker spot and finish, the floater that he has, right? One of the more underrated floaters in the NBA as a shooter in the lane. It fit with what Memphis needed, and then he blows out his Achilles. What is he able to do to recover from that? Can he get back to the place where Memphis is going to need him to be so that contract is not sunken cost? So that contract is not something that becomes a negative asset that Memphis has to give up stuff to get off of, like the Marcus Smart deal apparently became. Fast forward a couple of years, and we're past that worry. Brandon Clarke has answered every question about can he get back to what the Grizzlies need him to be. He is that. He is a phenomenal fit for these Memphis Grizzlies. I know we don't necessarily like Draymond Green, right? You can let us know in the comments. Hit me up on X at Joe Mullinax. You know, your least favorite aspects of Draymond Green's existence. But Draymond Green said something very smart, and other players, of course, in the past have said something similar. You need 16 game guys, excuse me. You need 16 game guys on your roster. You need 16 game players. And what Draymond and others mean by that is you need guys that may not be superstars, may not be someone who, when you're writing a playoff preview, you're focusing on. But when you go down the article or you listen to the podcast, they get a little bit deeper in and they get to the X factors. Brandon Clarke's an X factor. He is the X factor for these Memphis Grizzlies. He has a career low usage this season, and all these stats are from Cleaning the Glass. Career low usage, but still posting a really impressive 130.5 points scored per 100 shot attempts. He has a career low in assist rate, which is concerning, something that can get better. But he doesn't turn the ball over at the rate of other bigs. He is strong in that department. He is a really impressive creator of steals, 1.7% steal percentage. And he has a knack for offensive rebounds. Struggles as a defensive rebounder, and we saw that against the Jazz on Wednesday night. Not a strength of his. But he and Zach Edey, especially Edey, but Clarke, because obviously you can't play Edey and Clarke together a ton, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. Clarke is a good offensive rebounder. He does a good job on that front. And he is someone that is able to finish at the rim at an extremely high rate. Currently a career best 80% finisher at the basket. 80% of the shot attempts he takes that are at the rim go in. And that's important because in terms of efficiency, that 80% mark marries with him taking over half of his shots at the rim. And then you compare that with a lot of his shots coming in that floater range, the short mid-range. A ton of his shot attempts are connected to finishing at the basket, coming off of screens, or a few dribbles and getting his own shot up at the rim. He is a limited player, right? He's not somebody that you're going to look at and say, that's a max contract guy. He's someone that you can't play with everybody on your roster. I mentioned that he and Edey can't play together. Clarke is not a three-point shooter. I would argue that Edey is more of a three-point threat at this point than Clarke is, and that is not ideal in any way, shape, or form. That's not something that you want to say out loud if you are Brandon Clarke because you're a 6'8" center. But it is the reality of the situation. You don't play Brandon Clarke thinking that he's a floor spacer. So you probably can't play Edey and Clarke together. And that limits what Clarke can do outside of his minutes with Jaren Jackson Jr. Can Clarke play with Santi Aldama? Maybe. Santi has improved as a defender, but you're making yourself susceptible to rebounding issues. The same could be true next to Jaren. So Clarke is not a perfect fit, right, in terms of what he brings to the table. But he is a perfect fit in how what he brings maximizes and accentuates the Grizzlies' best players. You look at the advanced numbers, whether it's Cleaning the Glass, NBA.com/stats, anywhere you get those kinds of numbers and data, Brandon Clarke plays really well next to Ja Morant. And he plays really well next to Desmond Bane. And he plays really well next to Jaren Jackson Jr. Doesn't mean that he has to start. But you want guys that are a part of your organization, that are a part of your rotation, especially in the postseason. Can they play with my best guys, and are they able to accentuate and amplify what those dudes bring to the table and do so well to help Memphis win? Brandon Clarke does that. He is defensively versatile enough that he and Jaren Jackson Jr. are a dynamic defensive problem. Clarke screens really well with Bane. Bane understands where Clarke likes to get the ball to be in rhythm for that floater. And then Ja, nice high lobs for dunking spot finishes off of screens and pick and rolls. Clarke can do all of those things alongside those three guys. So the injury is no longer a concern. Brandon Clarke has fully returned to the role that he is destined to be with the Memphis Grizzlies, and that is that of a 16-game player. So kudos to Brandon Clarke. Really impressive showing, the effort, the dynamic ability to get up and finish and be all over the court and be that 16-game guy. He is that for Memphis. And when the postseason arrives and you have podcast episodes of Locked On Grizzlies and articles being written, sneaky suspicion Brandon Clarke's going to be mentioned as an X factor for the Grizzlies getting out of the first round and beyond. Thank you so much for being with me on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. It is appreciated. As I mentioned, I will be in Memphis this weekend for Grizzlies Cavs, Grizzlies Heat, the Tony Allen jersey retirement. I'll be covering both games for Locked On Grizzlies. Very excited to be there. And DeMichael and I have Blue City Cafe. That's where we're going to be after the game on Friday night. We'll be hanging out there. There's a nice spot in the back. Feel free to come by, say hello, let us know how you like the show. DeMichael and I will be hanging out at Blue City Cafe post-game on Friday. Again, we'll send it out on social media, all those sorts of things. Come hang out with us post-game Friday night, Blue City Cafe. Going to be a good time. I'm excited to hang out with my buddy DeMichael, talk Grizzlies basketball, and enjoy a weekend in the most beautiful land in the world, Memphis, Tennessee. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you get podcasts. We're proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Hopefully you're an everydayer at this point on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, and hopefully you're an everydayer with our free daily newsletter. Again, lockedondaily.com, lockedondaily.com. Click on Locked On Grizzlies and get words from me in your inbox about the Grizzlies each and every day. Until tomorrow, I look forward to seeing you then. Go Grizzlies, an impressive win against the Jazz. Maybe not by the amount you would have liked, but 4 wins in a row is 4 wins in a row. Take it, enjoy it. We'll catch you next time on Locked On Grizzlies.